The Gears of War universe is full of high-stakes battles, where the fate of humanity often rests on necklace dudes with chainsaw guns and a giant orbital death laser. But sometimes, it's the power of family that really ties everything together. So, let's dive into the various family trees that shape the events and world of Gears of War. And please, be sure to subscribe to the leaderboard. The Fenix family. Adam Fenix. The Fenix family tree starts with Adam, a former Gear who fought in the Pendulum Wars. He married a woman named Elaine, and they had their son, Marcus. But Adam's true legacy lies in his work as a scientist. The Pendulum Wars went on for literal decades, so he was tasked with creating a weapon to finally end the war. Adam uses some stolen UIR data to create the Hammer of Dawn. That's the giant death laser in the sky that we all know, love, and are absolutely terrified of. Adam ends up disappearing partway through the Locust War, and many presumed that he died. In reality, though, he ended up in Azura, a top-secret research facility. Here, he tried to figure out what to do against the lambent, and he pinned all the blame on Emulsion. Years of research led to the creation of the Emulsion countermeasure weapon, a powerful device that would eradicate the lambent, the locust, basically anything that posed a threat to humanity. In his last moments, Adam sacrificed himself to set off the weapon in hopes of ensuring a better future for his son. Marcus Fenix. Enter Marcus Fenix, the face of Gears of War. He didn't really inherit his father's scientific intellect, but he more than makes up for that in gruff muscle. Much like his father, Marcus joined the COG army and became a Gear. His leadership at Aspho Fields earned him and his squad mates Embry Stars, certifying him as a bona fide hero. Unfortunately, just a few short years after E-Day, Marcus was also responsible for one of the COG's worst blunders, the fall of the human capital, Ephyra. His actions earned him a 40-year sentence in the slab, but he only served 4 because the COG needed his help. Marcus ended up becoming the de facto leader of Delta Squad, once again proving his effective leadership skills. He kills General Rom, a powerful leader in the Locust army, and sets off the light mass bomb, destroying a major part of the Locust home and securing a victory for humanity. Unfortunately, that didn't end the Locust threat. Myrrah started sinking entire human cities at a time by using a giant riftworm. Once again, it's up to Marcus and Delta Squad to save the day. Sure enough, they stopped the riftworm by killing it from the inside, literally. They slice its arteries open with their lancers. To stop the Locust this time, Marcus and the COG plan to sink the Jacinto Plateau, where most of humanity's major settlements are located. When they sink it, they crush and flood the Locust's home underneath. 2 years after Marcus sunk Jacinto, he learned that his father was still alive in Azura. Myrrah and the Locust had taken over the facility, so it's up to Marcus to save his father. He tracked down Azura, but along the way he lost his best friend Dom, who nobly sacrificed himself. Marcus eventually reunited with his father and helped set off the Emulsion counterweapon, ending the Locust and Lambent threats. Unfortunately, Marcus had to watch his father die for real this time. When Queen Myrrah confronted Marcus, he stabbed her and decisively ended her life, stopping the Locust for, well, at least a little while. With the Locust seemingly taken care of, Marcus takes it easy for a while. I mean, who can blame him for wanting a vacation, right? He ends up marrying Anja Stroud and having a small family of his own. Anja Stroud. Anja was basically Marcus's guardian angel throughout all his adventures. For every heroic thing that Marcus has done, Anja has had his back. From Aspho Fields to the sinking of Jacinto, she's provided him situational intelligence as his communications officer. While Marcus was fighting with his boots on the ground, Anja was his eyes and ears from afar, at least until she decided to get into the action herself. When the Lambent became a major threat, she stormed the front lines alongside Marcus, joining Delta Squad on the ground. After the Locust threat was eradicated, she stepped up to be the first minister of the newly reformed COG. She helped shape humanity's bright future, and along the way, she married Marcus. Together, they had their first and only child, James Dominic Fenix. Unfortunately, Anja passed away due to a medical complication during surgery. That operation would have helped her have another child, but instead, she left behind a legacy that lives on in her son, JD. Also, JD's ally, Kait Diaz, eventually dons Anja's armor. JD Fenix. JD takes center stage when Gears 4 rolls around. After growing up, he joined the COG army, but he quickly became disillusioned with the organization after being ordered to fire on protesters. He and his friend Del joined the Outsiders in Fort Umson, a settlement that lives beyond COG jurisdiction. Here, he met Kait and contributed to the village's survival, at least until it was ransacked by the Swarm. To get help, JD sought out his estranged father, and together, they learned that the Swarm were actually evolved forms of the Locust. Turns out the Emulsion countermeasure weapon only made them stronger. JD spearheaded an attack on the Swarm, all in an attempt to save Kait's mother, Reina. His story isn't all about heroism, though. He made some poor choices down the line. For one, there was the whole opening fire on protesters that led him to leave the COG in the first place. Then, he made rash decisions on the battlefield, costing Lizzie Carmine her life thanks to a premature use of the Hammer of Dawn. In the end, though, JD still proved that he's a loyal friend. When Kait gets cornered by the new Swarm Queen, he jumps in to rescue her. Depending on the player's choice in Gears 5, JD can ultimately die at the hands of the Swarm's broodmother. The Carmine family. Anthony Carmine. Let's lighten things up by talking about the Carmine family. Okay, longtime Gears fans know the sad misfortune behind the name, so look, we'll just start with Anthony and go from there. For most of his life, he had a crippling fear of holes, but honestly, I don't blame him. If I lived in a world where locusts could pop out of the ground without warning, I would also be afraid of holes. 14 years after E-Day, Anthony joins Delta Squad as a fairly new gear. He was pumped to meet Marcus Fenix, the hero from Aspho Fields. It's not every day you meet a living legend. Unfortunately, Anthony's always had trouble keeping his head down and reloading Lancers. I can understand the tricky reload system, but come on man, keeping your head down is cover-based shooting 101. Early in Delta's mission to prepare the light mass bomb, Anthony complained about how his weapon just keeps jamming. He tried to show the rest of the squad what he's talking about, but then he gets picked off by a locust sniper. Just like that. Anyway, moving on to the next Carmine, Benjamin Carmine. After setting off the light mass bomb, Marcus found a new Carmine, Anthony's younger brother, Benjamin. Ben was conscripted the moment he turned 18, and right after getting through basic training, he joined Delta Squad. Despite being a complete rookie, he ended up seeing a lot of war in one day. But thanks to Marcus's tough love, Ben learned the ins and outs of being a gear. And for a while, Ben even lasted longer than his late brother. He was able to keep his head down, but Ben still met his untimely end during the Locust War. When Delta Squad became trapped inside the Riftworm, he was attacked by Nemesites. These things pinned him to the ground, their acidic spit burned right through his body armor, and quickly melted his torso. It was a pretty grotesque sight. In his dying breath, Ben asks Marcus to tell his mom and his brothers that he loves them. Clayton Carmine. Okay, so I'm sure you've noticed a pattern with the Carmines by now. Thankfully, Clayton definitely bucks the trend. He's the oldest of the brothers, but by the time we meet him in Gears 3, he's a fairly accomplished soldier with some experience under his belt. So he's already in a better position. He played an integral part in finally defeating the Locust, as he joined Marcus and the rest of Delta Squad in their assault against Azura. Specifically, Clay provided air support to Delta Squad as they climbed Pinnacle Tower. Without his help, Marcus and Adam wouldn't have been able to kill all the Locusts. Clay's aircraft does go down in flames, but he ultimately survives the crash, living to see another day. He returns home a hero, and he gets promoted to Chief Sergeant. Future Gears like JD and Dell train under him years down the line, and he eventually has a niece named Lizzie. You know how this is gonna go from here. Lizzie Carmine. Unsurprisingly, Lizzie joined the Cog army as soon as she could. Like your Uncle Clay, she had a super gung-ho attitude, and her skills as a Minotaur driver were unparalleled. She drove to Settlement 2 to help evacuate it during a swarm attack. Unfortunately, JD's decision to use the Hammer of Dawn before it was ready ended up backfiring, and the Death Laser went berserk. Lizzie got trapped in her Minotaur and ultimately perished just as JD was desperately trying to save her life. Guerry Carmine. The last Carmine on the list can be pretty easy to miss. Guerry might be the only Carmine that didn't join the Cog. Instead, he found a home in Fort Umpson with the Outsiders. He was a competent fighter in his own right, but he died during a Cog attack on the village. I feel like the Carmines are like the Lieutenant Dan lineage of Gears of War. The Meera Diaz family. Queen Myrrah and Dr. Torres. Pretty much everything bad that happens after E-Day can be traced back to one person, Queen Myrrah. She led the terrifying Locust in a war that nearly destroyed Sarah. But surprisingly enough, at one point, she was just a human who had a mutation that made her immune to emulsion. Scientists experimented on her, studying her genetic mutation. When they injected her stem cells into others, though, they created the very first Locust, right there in the New Hope research facility. With Meera at the center, she led the Locusts through their hive mind. Meanwhile, she fell in love with a scientist named Dr. Torres, and the two had a baby girl, Reina. The scientists also experimented on Reina, but Torres felt troubled by all these developments. So, he grabbed Reina and escaped the facility with her. The researchers told Meera about Torres' escape, but they also mentioned that Reina was killed in the process. So, Meera went absolutely berserk, and used her Locust to slaughter all the scientists in the facility. With her new deep-seated hatred for humanity, she took her Locust and found a new home underground called the Hollow. Of course, that home didn't stay safe for long. All of the emulsions started mutating the Locusts into lambent. So, Meera approached Adam Fenix seeking a cure. Unfortunately, he was unable to produce any meaningful results, and Meera couldn't wait for much longer. When she reached her breaking point, she sent her forces to the surface, starting a bloody, brutal war between the humans and the Locust. 17 years later, Meera lost her life at the hands of Marcus Fenix, and yet, her consciousness remained dormant within the Locust hive mind. Reina and Gabriel. By the time the Locust threat was eliminated, Reina had grown into a young woman. She married Gabriel Diaz, a former Cog soldier who performed well during the Pendulum Wars. He also spearheaded an offensive against Ukon, a Locust scientist, but we'll learn more about that in the upcoming Gears tactics. Nonetheless, after leaving military service, he settled down with his new wife and they formed Fort Umpson. Together, they had a baby daughter named Kait. Unfortunately, Gabe died due to unknown circumstances, leaving Reina to lead the village and raise Kait on her own. Then, 42 years after E-Day, the Swarm attacks the village. They ended up kidnapping everyone, but Reina was their main goal. They knew about her connection to the Locust Queen, and with Myrrah gone, who better to take her place? Eventually, Reina ended up becoming connected to the hive mind. Myrrah's consciousness took over Reina's body, turning her into a walking or slithering Lovecraftian nightmare. This Reina-Myrrah hybrid serves as the queen of the swarm, and she ends up snapping JD or Dell's neck, depending on what choice Kait makes. With a new army and a new body, Myrrah's wrath lives on, forcing humanity into another war for survival. Oscar Diaz. Kait's uncle Oscar served in the Pendulum and Locust Wars with his brother, Gabe Diaz. After the Locust War, Oscar also left the COG, joining his brother and sister-in-law as an outsider. He always knew his way around a gun, and would often train other villagers in combat, including Guerry Carmine, for all that was worth. On the night of the swarm attack, Oscar was one of the many people kidnapped by the monsters. However, he broke free from the Snatcher's clutches. He drifted along until he found the Riftworm village. There, he lived out the rest of his days protecting people against the swarm. Unfortunately, he met his untimely death at the hands of his own niece, Kait, whose uncontrollable link to the swarm forced her to kill Oscar. Kait Diaz. And that brings us to Kait, the granddaughter of Queen Myrrah. She was born and raised far from the new COG, learning to fight and hunt thanks to Reina and Oscar. After her mother was kidnapped, she embarked on a rescue mission with JD, Dell, and Marcus. But by the time they find Reina, she's already been partially assimilated into the Swarv hive mind. With her last bit of strength, Reina asks Kait to sever the connection and kill her. Reluctantly, Kait accepts her mother's last wish and takes the medallion of the Locust Horde symbol. This isn't the last time Kait hears from the Swarm, though. After getting the medallion, she begins getting visions of the Horde. Once she reaches the Riftworm village, her connection to the Swarm becomes uncontrollable. She didn't realize she was in control of a warden that kills her uncle Oscar right before her eyes. Kait was grieving and desperate to find answers. So, she heads to New Hope and learns about her lineage and connection to Myrrah. Disgusted, she severs all links to the hive mind, which simultaneously frees Myrrah and allows her to take over Reina's body. After the Swarm Queen kills JD, or Dell, Kait realizes what she needs to do: take the fight to the Swarm. And that takes us all the way through Gears 5. When you really think about it, the entire Gears saga can be boiled down to one decades-long feud between the Fenix family and Myrrah's lineage. If you want more family trees, you can let us know by subscribing. I've been Dan with the Leaderboard. We're 1 million players and counting. Thanks for watching.